Hello, I'm Nicholas Thompson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Wired. I'll be the moderator for today's extraordinary event. So I'd like to welcome you to the virtual Ocean Dialogues hosted by the Friends of Ocean Action and the World Economic Forum. It is the first ever completely virtual global ocean event. We're all going to be talking about the oceans from wherever we might be. In my case, it's from the attic in a house in upstate New York. The dialogues are bringing together leaders from business, government, civil society, and the scientific community from around the world. The outcomes from the virtual ocean dialogues will be presented to the hosts and organizers of the UN Ocean Conference, which will be held in due course in Lisbon, Portugal. So, what will we be talking about today? Oceans, obviously the majority of the world, source of life on this planet, but not entirely understood. We don't know exactly what's going on in so many places. And there's so many problems we could do a better job of solving if we had better data. If we understood exactly what is happening to fisheries, if we understood exactly how pollution travels, if we understood exactly the problem with plastics. So this panel will be about how we can get more data, how we can use modern technological tools from 5G to artificial intelligence to the most modern ships in the world to understand more about what's happening, and also how, once we get that data, we can share it in the right ways with the private sector, with the public, with governments. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We have an amazing panel. Before we start, though, I want to note that we're going to also want to hear from all of you. We want you to post questions on Slido. So take your phone, go to slido.com, use the event code #OceanDialogues, or scan the QR code that you should now see on your screen. Post questions throughout the session. We'll come back to these with our distinguished panelists. So, to begin, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, His Serene Highness Prince Albert II of Monaco. He's been a reigning prince of the Chief of State of Monaco since 2005. As a champion of environmental issues, he launched the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation in 2006 to focus on climate change, biodiversity, and access to drinking water. He has all along been a personal champion, an explorer, a wonderful, wonderful activist for the oceans and for the environment. Shortly before his foundation was established, he went on an expedition to the North Pole to draw attention to the impact of global warming. He will speak for a few minutes, and then we will move to the panel. So, Prince Albert, I turn the microphone over to you. We may be having some technical issues here, so I'm going to introduce the rest of the panelists, and then we will move to Prince Albert. So let me just talk about the panel who'll be joining after the introductory remarks from His Serene Highness. We'll have Bill Hilf. He's the CEO of Vulcan, where he directs investments and other initiatives around issues including wildlife preservation, climate change, and ocean health. He began his career as a software developer and engineer. He's worked at IBM, Microsoft, and Hewlett-Packard. He's a longtime wildlife enthusiast, and he even spearheaded a corporate penguin adoption program while at Microsoft. I had the pleasure of interviewing him in Davos a few months back. It's a delight to see him again. Vladimir Rabinin is the Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission and Assistant Director General of UNESCO. He is a seasoned oceanographer, climatologist, and marine engineer whose many accomplishments include helping to create the first Soviet technology for numerical weather prediction for medium ranges, which was implemented in the mid-1980s. Nina Jensen is the CEO of Rev Ocean, which is currently building the world's largest research and expedition vessel. It's doing all kinds of incredible scientific experiments out on the seas. Previously, she spent 15 years at WWF Norway, leading the organization for 5 of those. She holds a master's degree in marine biology from the College of Fishery Science at the University of Tromsø, which is the world's northernmost university. Tony Long is the CEO of Global Fishing Wash. He previously directed the Pew Charitable Trust's End Illegal Fishing program. Before that, he spent 27 years in the Royal British Navy, rising up to the rank of commander. Daniela Fernandez is the CEO of Sustainable Ocean Alliance, an organization she founded at 19 in her Georgetown University dorm room. SOA has since created the world's largest network of young ocean leaders through initiatives including the first ever Ocean Solutions Accelerator, which supports ocean startups. Her interest in climate change began when, after watching An Inconvenient Truth in high school, she fundraised to get her school to install solar panels on its roof. So that is our extraordinary panel. So let us begin with His Serene Highness, if we are back and have got him right here. Well, actually, we don't quite have him right here. So let me begin. Oh, he is here. Wonderful. All right. So His Serene Highness, Prince Albert, I hand the floor over to you. We'll have some introductory remarks and then we'll move to the panel. Thank you very much. It is a delight to be here with you again. His Serene Highness, please.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to have this link with all of you. And I send you greetings from not so sunny Monaco today, but we are improving. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm of course very sorry that we are not able to meet today in person as was previously planned. This United Nations conference was an extremely important event for all of us, I think, but this is wonderful that we can do it via this video conference. However, this series of virtual meetings organized by the World Economic Forum and Friends of the Ocean Action is a testimony, I think, the our habits and shoulder responsibility to address a common threat. The session that brings us together today invites us to reflect on the prospects of ocean sciences and the potential of a more effective use of the ever-growing data that we have at hand. I'm not a scientist, as you know, and therefore will not touch on the technical considerations concerning these matters, but I'd like to elaborate on some of the issues that we might discuss. As far as I see, there are three areas. First of all, there's the need to produce data, the requirement to have accurate information, enabling us to gain a better understanding of the oceans and the ways of protecting them. In this respect, I believe that an opportunity is being presented to us, which we need to seize, the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And I'd like to very much pay tribute to Vladimir Rabinin, who is with us this afternoon. The decade offers us a fantastic opportunity, I think, to give to science the prominence that it deserves, and more importantly, the resources necessary to deploy it. This will, of course, entail the mobilization of public resources, but also other resources, whether this be corporate commitment or citizen responsibility. It will certainly also entail the strengthening of multidisciplinary approaches through the development of means to explore and observe the ocean, and the need to incorporate environmental and socioeconomic dimensions into science. And it will entail the exploration of innovative technology, which will open up new opportunities for cooperation. I'm thinking of satellite surveillance systems, for example, particularly suited to issues as extensive as those concerning our oceans. Monaco, for instance, supports observation and monitoring missions to keep track of marine mammals using satellite-guided, the satellite-guided Sphyrna drones. This is one of the many solutions that I think we need to look into. The second issue, of course, is data ownership and sharing, which is one of the key factors to make faster progress as far as our knowledge is concerned for the benefit of all of us. There is, of course, a premise, the general interest to humankind. This has always been the essential value of science. 100 years ago, my great-great-grandfather, Prince Albert I, already made a strong focus of his work. And I know that many scientists share this vision for open science. From this point of view, there must be strong multilateral commitment within the context of the decade. However, the question of data sharing goes beyond general interest. It also promotes the development of private initiatives using new technologies to contribute to a more reasonable, a more responsible, and more sustainable use of marine resources. We need to work with private players and to help them insofar as they share our sustainable development goals. This brings me to the third issue, which is more broadly the blue economy, on which our efforts should be focused. Our humanity, now more than ever, is seeking new resources to satisfy its demands for energy, food, and raw materials. And in order to do so, it is turning to the sea and its huge potential. Faced with this outlook, it is now important to do everything we can to reconcile human needs with ocean imperatives. And it is therefore essential to promote any initiative that is likely to help us reach this goal. This will require the mobilization of economic players, making them see and understand the potential of the blue economy, and supporting them. And over and beyond the sharing of data, it will mean providing maximum support to ocean-friendly projects that take into account the needs and natural balance of our seas and our oceans. So in conclusion, I'd like to stress the importance of science in collective decision-making. If we want to protect our oceans effectively, we need to ensure that our actions are guided increasingly more often by the knowledge and warnings provided by the scientific community. Faced with the coronavirus, we saw the whole world submitting to the injunctions of medical science, and the majority of governments engaging independent scientific organizations. Today, how many countries are making the effort to let scientific recommendations guide their maritime policies? I don't know the answer to that. But interconnecting the decisions of political and economic players more effectively with the work of the scientific community, we should more than ever before, this should be more than ever before at the heart of our strategies, because the connections between science, decision makers, and public opinion has always been the principle of any responsible action. This is what I believe motivated my great-great-grandfather, Prince Albert I, who almost 100 years ago, when addressing the Washington Academy of Sciences, urged everyone to listen more carefully to, and I quote, "the words of our scientists who are keen to lead the world toward greater civilization," end quote. This is our goal and our duty, to bring about progress with the oceans by science. So thank you very much for allowing me to address you this afternoon.
And thank you very much to Serene Highness for those wise and absolutely crucial remarks. So now let's move to the second part of this, where we will bring in the panel and ask questions. Prince Albert will be on the panel, so you'll have more opportunity to hear from him. I'm going to start with Bill Hilf. Bill, it's good to see you again. You have an extraordinary background in tech. You've built all kinds of software. You've solved all kinds of problems. So let's start with a big and broad question to get this going. What is the most important or interesting data question involving the oceans right now?
Well, good morning from Seattle, or from a basement in Seattle. It's good to see everyone again, and it's an honor to be on this panel with so many amazing individuals and partners. We at Vulcan, we've been deeply rooted in technology since the creation of Vulcan by Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, about 35 years ago. My background is all in the tech sector before I joined at Vulcan. And really what we try to address in oceans and conservation, climate, communities is where are there gaps in the data, where are there deficits? And certainly, we all know that SDG 14 is the least measured, least monitored of all the development goals. And that's a real problem, because policy and regulation and enforcement rely on credible and current data. So that was really our Vulcan, our call to action. And so when we look at the availability of technology today, be it commercial satellite availability, be it techniques from artificial intelligence and machine learning, data growth and availability, we're really at the beginning of what I think could be a revolution in technology, opening up and solving for that deficit in information. We, for example, focus very closely on coral reef protection and restoration data, illegal fishing, is probably one of the biggest areas that we invest in around using satellite technology, global vessel databases, machine learning to identify suspicious fishing vessel behavior. And that system is called Skylight. So I do believe the pressure on the ocean and the lack of data that exists, the generation really of this panel, right, of this conversation, is crucial. But we're at the precipice of being able to really take advantage of the best from the technology sector, both from the tech itself, but also the human capital, the people who are building these technologies and can apply these technologies for conservation.
Thank you very much, Bill. And you are perfectly timed with our audience. Right when the first question came in, it said SDG 14, and at that very moment, you said SDG 14. So you're in sync, and that is again a reminder to everybody who's watching: ask your questions on Slido. I want to move to Vladimir and move to a big topic, and then we'll loop back to what Bill was just saying. But January of 2021 will mark the beginning of the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. So let's start by you just telling us about the ambitions for that.
Thank you very much, Nick, for this question. And let me start also by expressing my inspiration to be on this great panel. And it was, of course, very nice to hear from you, Monsignor, a reference to decade at the very beginning of this dialogue, which is precious for us. So let me start. Despite I'm a scientist, I'd like to start like a bureaucrat. First of all, the United Nations General Assembly on the 5th of December 2017 proclaimed the United Nations Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, starting on the 1st of January 2021 for 10 years. You know, this is a very big thing for oceanography. When 195 governments decide that oceanography is very important for this world. Now, IOC, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, is working with many partners, and we are preparing for the launch of the implementation plan of the decade. So, if we are all successful, then the decade may become the largest campaign in the history of ocean sciences ever. But you know, this is not, of course, about the size. It's about the content and what we can achieve. So the logic about the decade is quite simple. Continuation of our civilization, the issues of availability of food, the issues of mitigating and adapting to climate, the energy, production of energy, sustainable ocean economy, human health, which is so important now, even I would say peace. They all strongly depend on the health of the ocean and ocean services to us. So at the current moment, I would state that the ocean science is at a level of development when it can sound alarm. But you know, when it comes to the ability to ocean science to offer solutions, we still need to move forward. And that actually formulates the vision of the decade. And the vision reads, the science we need for the ocean we want. So the main decade ambition is to trigger a revolution in ocean science, to go from the ocean that we have now to the ocean that we want. And this actually formulates the 7 societal outcomes of the decade. And these outcomes are qualities of the ocean and the society. So the ocean needs to be clean, healthy, resilient, productive, predictive, safe, accessible, inspiring, and engaging. And you can easily see that, you know, some of these qualities belong to the qualities of the ocean, but some of them really belong to the qualities of our society on the coast of the ocean. So, you know, of course, not single nation can develop such capacity. So the main idea of the decade to offer a framework and a platform for cooperation between different communities: the science community, United Nations agencies, United Nations as a whole, private sector, governments, public, you name it. So we specifically propose 10 challenges for the decade. This is also, these are initial challenges. There may be more, there may be less in the future, but you know, these challenges will guide the first actions of the decade. We will soon issue a call for action. So basically, we need to make the society literate about the ocean, triggering good attitude towards the ocean, and then we have to do the real hard science. That means observing, mapping the ocean, predicting the state of the ocean, developing, and this really refers to the subject of this meeting, the digital twin of the ocean, how we represent the past, current, and future state of the ocean. And hopefully this all will culminate in a behavior change in our society. So we'll start managing the ocean for the first time in history of our planet sustainably. That is the main idea, to use the science to start managing the ocean sustainably. And of course, you know, this is a very complicated thing, but we have to do it not only for the developed countries, but also for the whole world, leaving no one behind. So this is basically the main idea. And I would like to invite you to go to oceandecade.org and see more about that. But I'm very open to questions as well. Thank you very much for this.
Well, that was a wonderful, inspiring, and ambitious description of what we're heading into, the greatest project to understand ocean science we've had, and a way to move from the ocean we have right now to the ocean we want. So Prince Albert, let's bring politics into this conversation. Of all that's going to be worked on in the decade of ocean science, what are the parts that are most important to bring to political leaders? And what are the parts that political leaders will be most likely to act on?
Is this question for me or?
Yes, for you.
Oh, sorry.
As the representative of all political leaders on this panel.
Well, sorry about that. I was going through other.
It is a big question.
Other messages. Well, you know, the oceans are so complex, vast, and unique realities with multiple issues at stake. But I believe, quite simply, we need to refocus on the very principle of human development and ocean conservation. So I think there are as many economic solutions or choices as political ones to promote, of course, ocean-friendly economic activities, to support the sustainable development of marine resources and control them using sound international legal instruments for the high seas, for instance, to promote responsible tourism, for which the demand will continue to grow once we have overcome this pandemic, of course, and to end funding for destructive activities. I think that is also key. I think the relentless promotion that most of us have undertaken for quite a number of years now, the promotion of marine protected areas, which directly contribute to the prosperity of coastal populations, to develop also alternatives to the use of plastics, which, as we know, causes so much damage to marine ecosystems. But also, we need to consider new threats that have come upon us, the nanoparticles, endocrine disruptors, and obviously to intensify our efforts in regards to the energy transition that we are all calling for. So I think all of these facts are important, but I really believe, as Vladimir just said, that this United Nations decade of ocean science for sustainable development gives us an extraordinary opportunity to put these solutions forward and to have an increased opportunity and a platform to inform governments in a much more constructive way and in a much more direct way, and to help identify also the sustainable and innovative solutions that we have to implement, those that are economically viable and, of course, respectful of the environment.
Wonderful, thank you. Nina, let's move over to you. So you have the world's largest ship. You're going to be starting all kinds of incredible scientific experiments. Tell me what data you'll be collecting and how you hope it will be used.
So basically, it's up to the scientists that will be invited to come on board the vessel to identify the most crucial research topics. But we've chosen 3 particular themes that we want to focus on, which are climate change, overfishing, and plastic pollution. And obviously, we want to identify key knowledge gaps in these areas, but most importantly, focus on the solutions to the problems. So the science undertaken on the vessel will be very solutions driven, where we will also be piloting and testing out concrete technologies and policy ideas, for that matter, on how to move these crucial issues forward. We also see collaboration as key to really addressing the majority of these problems. So bringing together a wide range of different stakeholders, industry actors, ocean activists, scientists together on the same platform, we see as critical in resolving a lot of these issues.
And what do you mean bring them all together on the same platform?
So in platform, I mean the Rev Ocean vessels. So bringing them all together out in, for example, some critical areas of the ocean where, imagine if you could bring some of the world leaders out to the tuna spawning grounds, for example, taking them down in our submarine to explore and understand better what is actually happening with the tuna. How can it be more sustainably managed? What are some of the critical knowledge gaps that we have, and how can we collaborate better to improve their management and make both the tuna stocks and our seas more sustainable?
Well, I hope you'll also take some journalists out when you do that too.
Absolutely, communication is key.
Great, wonderful, thank you, Nina. Tony, let me move to you. And so we've talked about a bit about data, how to gather it, how to share it, what data we need, but of course data alone isn't enough. So what else are we going to need to do once we figured out how to gather the data, how to share it properly? What will be the steps that you'll be most interested in taking after that?
Yeah, so data and the technology is important, of course, but I think there's some other elements. I think people call it the secret sauce. I would say there's 3 key elements that we need to keep in mind when we're applying the technology and the various data sources. International collaboration, the implementation of the Port State Measures Agreement, and greater transparency in all fishing operations. I call these they're a transformational trio, because if applied properly, we're going to see the situation change on the oceans rapidly. I'll give you a little bit of the reasons why. If you can consider transparency as the main ingredient, it's the real framework for change to happen. The transparency can overcome the weaknesses in the current fractured system where information and data is available, but those that need it can't find it or can't access it or don't know it exists. And in fact, Nina's working on similar projects to make data more openly available, and we've heard from Vulcan about how they're doing the same. We've got to somehow drive information into the public, otherwise it's all too easy for people to take advantage of the patchy system. And I'm not talking simply tracking vessels. Transparency should extend to things like unique vessel identifiers, fishing authorizations, and things like beneficial owners. Who owns these vessels? It's not the vessels that fish illegally, it's the people that operate them. The Environmental Justice Foundation lay out 10 clear principles within their document called The Outer Shadows. It's an interesting read, and I recommend people take a look at it. And similarly, FITI provide a further layer of transparency principles that allow governments to change the way their operations are perceived. So if you can bring things out into the open using transparency, you can now suddenly improve the collaboration, and that's the key. Collaboration makes things much easier. Countries can work together without the burden of confidentiality in a system that drives better behavior. The deterrent effect of open information is important, and the easier to see who has authorized what, who is doing what, means that the international response can be that much more robust and indeed, importantly, more affordable. So you see transparency come together with that collaboration, And then we can bring it together where we can really hurt these illegal fishers, which is in the ports. Every fish that is caught has to come in through a port. We focus on the ports through things like the Port State Measures Agreement, which closes the route for markets where companies and owners trying to land IUU fish have to come. So in short, the PSMA will flourish on information sharing. Transparency catalyzes that change, and it provides an easy route for collaboration. That's the secret sauce as I see it.
All right, data, transparency, collaboration, and stop those illegal fishing boats. Daniela, I'd like to bring you in here and ask, what is the role? There are a lot of young ocean activists. There are some wonderful organizations, yours included, that have been doing fantastic work on helping to protect our oceans. What is the role of a younger generation that has grown up with artificial intelligence, grown up with technology, grown up with the internet, and helping to make sure that we use data appropriately, we share it appropriately?
Thank you for that question, Nicholas. You're right. Young people have in fact already taken on this challenge of how to utilize data and technology to protect and sustain the health of our ocean. We are currently supporting thousands of young people from over 165 countries that are working on these types of solutions. But in order to understand how people are approaching this transformation, I think we need to take a look at the values that this younger generation upholds. And first of all, we strongly believe that transparency, like Tony was saying, is a key to making sure that data is open sourced. As a generation that grew with the internet in the palm of our hands, we are always going to be proponents of avoiding the privatization of data and working to create open source standards for data, especially when it comes to the common resource that's our ocean. And second of all, we also believe in equality. Right now, there's a lot of technology that is being developed in the West and being passed down patronizingly to poorer countries. So when in fact, as we talk about data collection, we also should be talking about the ethical data revolution that we need that will be inclusive to empower small island states and poorer countries that truly make up 70% of our ocean activity. And ultimately, if this transformation is just not going to take place on its own, it will require very active interventions, which begins by giving marginalized people a voice, an opportunity to develop their own technology and collect ocean data. And to do so, we need to provide funding for these ideas to be brought to life, develop partnerships that will champion these pilot data collection projects globally, and again, empower all stakeholders to have a say in these matters.
Wonderful. Well, I've been looking at Slido where people have been firing off questions, voting them up. Please keep entering your questions, vote up the questions you want to hear. I'm going to start asking some of them because they're wonderful. So here's a question from Richard Holmquist. It may be best directed at Bill, but anybody else can take a crack at it. What do the panelists believe are the most promising new sources of data and analytics tools for illegal fishing detection and enforcement?
I'll take a crack at it, and others can jump in. We are big believers in not just the current state of satellite data, but also the growth of capabilities that are on the roadmap, so to speak, of what's going to be possible from commercial satellites. The ocean's too big, too immense, and you need technology that can work at that scale. It's not just imagery, or there's a variety of new techniques and methods we think are going to be very powerful. On the analytics side, really, I don't think it's a single tool. I think it's an approach. I think it's an approach of using the best of machine learning. Something that was said by the other panelists, which I couldn't agree with more, is we really lack the equivalent of what happened in the late 90s and 2000s of the open source software movement in the tech industry. That hasn't happened here. And so the common formats, the way to share data, how to deal with IP issues, really important that gets addressed when it comes to the data and the analytics and usage of that data.
Terrific. Why don't I move to another question from, Tony, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little bit because Richard, I know, works for a pretty inventive company that's using radio frequencies to help detect dark targets. I look back in my military days and I had an operations room surrounded on my ship, and I had every plethora of bit of data that I wanted. It was all high end. That data that was generally military use is now pretty much in the public domain. So we're seeing synthetic capture radar given away through things like Sentinel-1. We see philanthropies like Bill's working on providing data and Global Fishing Watch. So the technology itself is out there. The careful decision is how you choose what technologies you need in order to achieve your aim. It's very easy to bring it all into one place when actually a lot of things just don't need all of the bits of tech that are available. And that's what makes it unreachable for some of the more resource challenged countries. So it's important to balance the tech with the policy. And there's stuff that hasn't been invented yet, which will probably make real difference in the next few years.
Absolutely, that's the wonderful thing about technology and science. Well, let me take a follow-up. So let me address this to Vladimir. So we have a lot of the data out there, some of the data being gathered by the military, some data being gathered by private fishing boats. Vladimir, as you think through the decade of ocean science for sustainable development, what are the incentives that need to be given to different actors to make sure that we get the data we need to accomplish the goals we need to accomplish?
Yeah, I think it's a central question for the decade, and I think it will be useful, Nick, if we move forward towards the whole idea of the decade, I think Daniela already mentioned the issue of transparency and how decisions are made. And, the future, I think, of our civilization depends on that transparency. And this is also an issue for the ocean. And if we have a data system that is open to all, that is verifiable, that is also standardized and authoritative, then I think we are in totally different weight category in many aspects when it comes to decision making in environmental matters. So, and because of that, I think there is some resistance as well. It's much easier to not to share data and and to adhere to political issues, or decisions, or restrictions. So basically, I think you see we have already a data policy, which calls for free, open, and expeditious access to data. But it's incredibly difficult to implement that policy. I would say that in the science domain, we have around 100 national oceanographic data centers in the world. And I would say that we have petabytes of data, not even terabytes, petabytes of data produced regularly by different systems. And we have satellites, we have in situ observing platforms, we have all kinds of collections in biology. They are probably not so developed, our part of the world, in the use of industrial data. And this is where the real merit should take place. When science can move forward towards describing the environment, but the decisions are made based on the industrial data that is effectively using the environmental science. So we are moving forward now on designing that system, and this is where we need, the big minds coming from the IT sector, from big companies that have a lot of data. So that is exactly the vision that we have. And we need to find the right data, and we are moving towards that by creating new search agents. We need to make sure the data are interoperable, which is a very big deal. And there are different approaches to this. And to find the right approach requires big consultation. And this is exactly the idea of the decade, to offer a platform for moving forward. For this big consultation, so we could find consolidated decisions that will be opening the data world for the system. But as a scientist now, not as a bureaucrat, I would like to say the following. So every data stream requires an idea. So we have an idea. This idea is to predict the state of the ocean and start managing it. And if we have this idea, and people share this, then we're able to deduce, going back in time or back in the logic, the data system that we need for that. I think there is a huge opportunity that is ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that terrific answer. Daniela, let me address the next question at you. It's the most upvoted question here in Slido, and it's a great one. And it ties into something that you mentioned in your opening remarks. And the question comes from Anonymous, Put your name on it. This is a great question. Be proud of it. How can local communities and indigenous people holders of traditional knowledge be included in ocean data, research, and innovation?
Thank you for that. No, that's a great question. And I think that oftentimes when we are having these very high level conversations, a lot of the decision making comes from white papers, right? Instead of really listening to the people on the ground and to understanding what problems they're facing on a day-to-day basis. So I really think it starts with a listening campaign from folks that have the power to make decisions. Then it goes into giving people on the ground a seat at the table for us to better understand their challenges and better understand how can we support them in data collection. And in addition to that, I also believe that a lot of the data and technology that exists, it's not very inclusive, right? So how can we make sure that people on the ground are active participants in this instead of simply receiving data and receiving technologies that have already been developed and built? So in this world, in this day of age where we're struggling a lot with injustice and lack of inequality, I think it's important that we start thinking about all stakeholders and inclusivity in all levels of public society, in science, in technology, and as we develop technology and data.
Wonderful, thank you. Nina, maybe I'll take this question for you. This is another question from Anonymous, maybe the same person, maybe somebody else, but the question gets at something you were talking about. And the question is, how do we use data from citizen scientists? We have government data, we have satellite data run by companies, we have private companies that are out on the ocean, but what about citizens out collecting useful data? And it ties into a broader question, one of the themes that you mentioned in your opening remarks, which is how you make data interoperable. So how do you make it so that individuals can go out and collect data that then can be shared and accomplish the goals that everybody on this panel wants? Nina, do you want to take that? And then if anybody else wants to take a crack at that, you're welcome to, please.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think it ties in nicely to Daniela's question and comment as well. I mean, it's obviously enabling both citizens at large, but also communities that may not have access to the same kind of tools that we're using to actually get that. And having, whether it's a listening campaign or providing specific apps, platforms for collaboration, and including that kind of data into decision making in science and collaboration. And I think it's absolutely essential that we enable those kind of platforms and that we spend more time on finding the right tools for including local communities, people from all over the world, and citizens at large, because otherwise we simply will not manage this enormous task. But there's a lot of talk about data collection, what additional data needs to be collected, and how to make use of it. But I think we also really importantly need to talk about how do we make sure that that data gets put into the right hands. So enabling decision makers to get access to that data and possibly also enabling citizens to better track and hold our decision makers accountable. So making the whole data system more transparent, I think, is also an essential part of that.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I'll direct this next question at Prince Albert, because it ties to something that you mentioned in your opening remarks. And Prince Albert, you've been such a prominent voice and driver of ocean science and exploration. And how do we convince other world leaders to act with renewed urgency, particularly as we get through what's on everybody's mind right now, which is the post-coronavirus recovery?
Thank you. Yeah, well, that's always a very delicate question. But I think here again, we must reason in economic terms also. Governments and government leaders have this legitimate mission and even an obligation to address the needs of their people, and especially in times of crisis or of crises, and as the one that we are experiencing right now, and perhaps also the impending crisis, climate change and loss of biodiversity and all the other issues that we are facing. So the concerns, the urgent concerns, of course, focus most of the time predominantly on economic and social issues. So I think there is a real need to emphasize the fact that the blue economy offers really the beneficial solutions to address this crisis and to fight the irresponsible predation of marine resources that in the long term, as we know, will only cause further disaster. So as you all surely know by now, but I'll repeat it. I'll repeat this figure just for those who are listening. It is estimated that 3.5 billion people depend on the ocean for their main source of food. And this figure could increase by most studies that I've seen twofold within the next 20 years, reaching close to 7 billion. So these people need to be allies and not enemies, of course. And you know, just over a year ago, the weight of the blue economy was also estimated by the Boston Consulting Group at 270 billion euros. So I think we need to make blue economy really a priority by supporting ethical industries, by monitoring their development, by taking all the measures necessary at every level, tax incentives, as well as regulations, to access resources, access to resources and ecosystems, especially the most fragile ones, which are often, of course, the most coveted. So we need to, by any means possible, to use our different influences and different ways to reach governments and leaders to understand the importance of the blue economy and to push it forward. I think we all have a mission to do this. It's not just people like me who are in a position of responsibility, but I think the influences must come from the private sector, from the scientific community, and from civil society at large.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me move to an audience question that I find striking. Maybe Nina or Tony, you want to take a crack at this. This is from Saqib Mahmood, and the question is, the use of cutting-edge technology for ocean conservation often clashes with security perceptions of some states. How do you overcome this hurdle?
Do you want to start, Nina?
I was actually hoping that you would give it a crack, but
well, I'll give you an example while you're thinking through, because I know these questions are asked quite a lot. So I think security is all a perception. People think that something needs to be hidden because that knowledge makes them stronger, when actually sharing the knowledge is what makes them stronger. I'll give you an example again from my Navy days, countering piracy in the Gulf of Aden. We had a task force of over 32 nations at one stage looking to counter piracy. That included Russians, Iranians, Koreans, Chinese, Europeans, Americans, Gulf states. A lot of those don't normally share information, yet they found a way to do it through the shared awareness and deconfliction system. So it's really only a matter of personal choice about whether you share this data or not. And if the data is shared, of course, you can redact it slightly. And we often talk about Global Fishing Watch having transparent data, but actually we do delay the transmission of that data, and we do redact it slightly to ease people's problems with sharing the full data set. But we do share enough to make people clear about what is happening on the water. Nina?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's also a matter of, showcasing that it's not dangerous to do so, that it can actually be beneficial. And again, ensuring good collaboration between individual states, for example, showcasing how they're doing it and how it can be done safely and actually to the benefit of the individual nations. So maybe for those that are most skeptical or not willing to openly share their data or allowing technology for measuring or monitoring particular elements of their ocean areas, as an example, we really need to bring in the right partners to demystify and make it less scary to undertake those kind of activities and provide benefits for the parties involved at the same time.
Great. And Daniela, do you want to jump in on this? Have there been issues where state concerns have clashed with in your view, the proper gathering of data and the proper sharing of it?
We've definitely heard from a lot of entrepreneurs as far as there being a misunderstanding from government entities as to how the technologies work and how they're being utilized. So I think it really always comes back to just having this ability to over communicate and also to empower governments and state actors to provide startups and these new innovative technologies the ability to have pilot projects so they can work together as opposed to working against a state that is trying to figure out how to better protect its data.
Wonderful. And Vladimir?
I was trying to unmute, sorry. Thank you, Nicholas. And thank you for prompting actually by the previous answers to me to offer my version to this, and would like also to come back to the decade of ocean science. And I think one of the successes of the decade that it would anticipate would be that in the result of a development of science based on data sharing, the products that will be created will be so valuable. It will be much more advantageous for country to get the exchange of data, get the products, rather than to sit on the data, keep the data close to the chest. And Russians actually have a saying about this. This is like a dog sitting and barking on top of a haystack. So, the dog doesn't eat hay. So I think we need really to generate something for consumers, and then we will change the paradigm. Thank you.
I was hoping we would get a good Russian parable. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me move to a question. And I think, Bill, you're probably the best position to answer this question, but anybody else can jump in on this. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go for a couple more questions here. So here's the question. It comes from Mark Abbott. How do we open up today's ocean technology landscape, which is expensive, so that is open for anyone with a new idea for hardware or software to plug in?
Good question. And it can be expensive, either the cost of data, real-time data from a satellite, or an autonomous underwater vehicle, and different types of capabilities. I think this is another area of partnership and collaboration, both public and private sector, that needs to come together. There's a lot of vessels on the ocean. There's a lot of research going on. There's a lot of exploration going on that can be much more harmonized and shared. And I believe this is part of the mission that some panelists have on here about creating data platforms on the ocean. So I do think that there needs to be both a collaboration of what exists, and as Daniela was mentioning, getting the venture community and the investment community to understand how they can go after these types of markets. We've cracked that we've democratized expensive technology all over the place in the consumer world, all over. The things you can do from your phone now, the ability to, the gig economy essentially, and so it's possible to do, but it requires the venture community to come into the picture as well.
Wonderful. Well, let me ask one follow-up that was just asked by, I believe it is Laura in Slido. And the question is, will someone here give me an example of a recent win in data collection or data science involving the ocean? Something that inspires you. So that's open to anybody on the panel. Vladimir?
Yeah, thank you. Good question, and this is a good test indeed. I would like to refer to the system, which is a distributed database, which is called Ocean Biodiversity Information System, that was born from the I think, a revolutionary program called Census of Marine Life. And now we have millions and millions, I would say 15 million different records of data that now is making possible all analysis that goes to the IPCC and the Governmental Panel on Climate Change analysis. So, you know, there is a huge revolution in data, and this actually leads to big decisions. Another example, you remember before 2015, there was a big discussion about the hiatus in global warming. It is the ocean data, and the Vulcan Foundation was very instrumental in that, based on the Argo data that showed that a lot of heat went into the depths of the ocean. And because of that, the surface didn't warm as strongly as could be expected. And this led actually to the dismissal of that theory of hiatus. And eventually it led to the signature of the Paris Agreement on climate. So this is how science can lead to big political decisions shaping the future of the planet.
Wonderful. All right, so last question. We just have a couple of minutes left. So I'm going to ask a question that was directed at Vladimir and Prince Albert, but I think it's really a question for anybody. And it comes from Kate Larkin. And the question is, what will success look like for the digital ocean developments over the UN decade of ocean science? So anybody wants to take a crack at it? We have 2 or 3 minutes left. Please do.
If I may just take a quick stab at that, because I think that one of the areas that we haven't mentioned during this conversation is just the importance of bringing the value chain of all of these different technologies together. And there are many gaps that exist. And just to give you an example, you know, some of the companies in our portfolio, in our accelerator portfolio, some of them are collecting data. Some of them are trying to transfer data. Some of them are trying to analyze the data. And so if we don't spend enough time truly empowering and developing each of the each of the links of this chain, we are not going to be successful in how all these systems work together. So I think there's something to be said about creating those communication mechanisms, creating that ability for us to have open source problems, data problems as well, so that the larger community can come in and tackle it as a whole instead of working in silos, which is currently happening in our data and ocean community.
Superb. Tony?
Yeah, I think success would be countries having the strength to move together. Like Prince Albert says, there's a real leadership need here. And what we actually want is sustainable fishing for all. So when rather than see the decline in fishing, what we want to see is people fishing sustainably, and rather than people moving forward as individuals, if they can move together as one, there's a net gain for all. No one's left behind. There's no one disadvantaged. So in this decade, where actually the Sustainable Development Goal 14 is supposed to be delivered, can we see a group of countries move together so that it just is an overwhelming shift and get that momentum moving? I would see that as success.
That would be extraordinary success. Nina?
I would say improved collaboration across nations, across industries, across sectors to get the data that we're still lacking, but also making sure that we're collecting the right kinds of data in the right places at the right time. But most importantly, that data is being put to good use. Data is of no value if it's just stuck in silos or in individual heads. It really needs to be made readily available to decision makers so that we can really make the right decisions that the ocean so desperately needs.
Bill, do you want to add in what success might look like to you?
I agree with this can't be the typical NGO to NGO type of partnerships. This requires public, private, NGO, multilaterals to come together as a network. Countries, I would say, if we look at the biggest gap that we see, at least, is how do we start really turning this data into actionable, enforceable, current, so that we don't have MPAs and EEZs that are just paper structures, that we can actually take act to start making the change, and not just convene or research the change, but go actually action the change.
Wonderful. Prince Albert?
I agree with everything that's being said, but just to rebound on what Nina said, I think there is a need of collaboration on at every level. But on the scientific level, I think if there's more multidisciplinary research also being undertaken, and that sharing of those information and data will be absolutely crucial, I think, to implement the best solutions on the legal front and also on the government sides to really put into place the right framework and also the right priorities to push forward. So I think it's really a collaboration at every level on the scientific level, on the of course the government level, but also of course the economic leaders and civil society are equally as important to and NGOs, and of course to put their input also.
All right, thank you very much. There could not be better closing remarks, and we are precisely out of time. So thank you very much to this extraordinary panel for all of their insight and wisdom, their good ideas, their thoughts on collaboration. I feel more optimistic now at the end than I did before. Thank you to everybody in the audience who asked questions, whether with your name anonymously or under the jellyfish, who asked a very good question that I unfortunately was not able to get to. We're now going to move. We're not done. We're not even close to done. We are moving to some closing remarks, and you are not going to want to leave. So please stay with us. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's the Minister of Sea, Ricardo Serrão Santos. He's the Minister of Sea of Portugal, who's formerly the Director of the Department of Oceanography and Fisheries at the University of the Azores and a member of the European Parliament between 2014 and 2019. His academic work includes more than 400 published works on the study of marine biodiversity and ocean ecosystems. So please welcome Minister Santos.
Hello.
It's great to see you. It's an honor. It's an honor to get to.
Prince, yeah, panelists.
Thank you so much.
For you, Nicholas. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much. It's great to be on Zoom with you here. So I'm just going to ask you 2 questions, and you'll wrap it up, summarize, and give us even more insight than the wonderful things that have been said before. So you uniquely are both a minister and a very distinguished marine scientist. It means that the UN Decade of Ocean Science is particularly relevant to you. But let's go to what the question that was asked at the end. What does success look like in this decade? And of course, a decade of ocean science relies on data when there's enough that's being made publicly available. So how do we get the data we need? How do we use it to liberate all the data we want? And what does success look like?
Okay, thank you, Nicholas. As you know, Portugal has been and is a supporter of the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, and you should stress this, which is running now under the International Oceanographic Commission in the United States, and will keep as that. In fact, I was nominated member of the executive panel planning group of the decade while before taking charge as minister. But in my current role, I strengthened my conviction to look at science as fundamental to support good governance. This pandemic we are living has shown very clearly the importance of science to societies, there's no doubt. And the decade is an opportunity for science to contribute substantially to society, take advantage of the momentum created around the importance of the ocean for humanity, for address one of the big challenges that the world faces, and that is the climate emergency. Most of the decisions that have to be taken to reverse the destructive aspects happening in the ocean need that our cities, our roads, our land, our energy choices change. I often recall the name of this decade, not a decade of ocean, but of ocean science, stressing the importance of scientific knowledge, and the decade with a purpose to contribute to sustainable development, and thus interconnected with the Agenda 2030 and the SDG 14, but also many of other SDGs. For instance, the SDG 2 of zero hunger, as I believe the ocean is a fundamental piece in securing securing food through sustainable managed fisheries. And fortunately, during this last decade, we had some successes in putting on the good road some of our fisheries. But we are far away with IUU fisheries still thriving there, and many stocks, many manatials still overdeveloped, overexploited. You asked, what does success look like in this decade? First, I envision getting to 2030 with a much more engaged society. Nowadays, and it's a growing tendency, any political decision, for better or for worse, will not progress without social consent. But we must find ways of reaching people, realizing that our best shot is to base decisions in the best knowledge available, including local and indigenous knowledge, with science playing an absolutely necessary role in surpassing this era of post-truth lies that we are facing. Second, a decade of ocean science will boost our knowledge of the ocean bathymetry, ocean biodiversity, ocean ecosystems, a more grounded awareness of the multiple stressors that the ocean faces. And third, I hope this decade brings more equity between countries in their ability to perform research, both in terms of human resource and infrastructure. And this is where cooperation and international partnerships play an enormous role. And this me. Okay, thank you.
Superb. Let me ask you a quick follow-up. And so speak more from your minister and your government perspective. So how does all this ocean science and innovation help a government build a sustainable ocean economy?
Sorry, can you repeat? Sorry?
The question is, how does all the innovation and the science and the data that we've talked about help a government in building a sustainable ocean economy?
Okay. Ideally, the decade would facilitate having all data from all international organizations. Worldwide, we see efforts for global ocean observation and organizing the gathering of data from the Global Ocean Observing System and international oceanographic data and information exchange to the numerous studies made through, for instance, the ICES, and also many initiatives at the European level, which I would like to identify, particularly the ModNet. On the other side, at a smaller dimension, namely at national level, data are often scattered. I see this decade as an opportunity for national marine data systems to implement at large, including in Portugal. One of my missions as Minister of the Sea is to install the Atlantic Observatory in the Azores Islands in cooperation with the Ministry of Science and Higher Education, and integrated it with the HER Center, the Azores International Research Center, intended, among other things, as an infrastructure for marine data collection, but also for those interactions between the ocean and the atmosphere.
All right. Thank you very much to the Minister. Thank you to all the distinguished speakers. So we are now at the very end of the session. Thank you for everyone for your participation. And I want to remind all registered participants that the virtual ocean dialogue on ocean data and science is not over with this panel, but will continue after a 15-minute break with some interesting deep dive discussions that you can now see on your screen. To join the deep dives, reconnect to TopLink and access the next session you would like to attend. Thank you very much for all of the wisdom of all the panelists. Thank you to everybody who joined. Thank you very much. And let's hope that we can accomplish in the next decade all that has been laid out here. Have a good rest of the day.